This story is a courtroom drama that explores themes of resilience, justice, systemic inequality, and the courage to stand up against power. It centers on a courageous Black woman, Amara Johnson, who takes on a landmark case against a powerful system that has long overlooked or intentionally oppressed people like her. Despite the significant odds stacked against her, especially from a biased judge who actively works to undermine her case, Amara's unwavering faith in justice and the law drives her to fight on. At its heart, this story is about fighting for what's right even when the entire system is against you. It's a David versus Goliath tale, where the protagonist, a young Black female lawyer, faces a powerful judge and an unjust legal system that attempts to suppress her efforts. Her victory not only changes the course of the trial, but also has a ripple effect in her community and the larger legal framework. The genre of the story is courtroom drama mixed with social justice. There are elements of thriller in the form of tense courtroom showdowns, mystery as the case unravels layers of corruption, and inspirational as the protagonist's growth and resilience are revealed. The dominant emotion is righteous anger and vindication. Throughout the story, Amara is constantly fighting to prove that her voice matters in a world that often tries to silence her. But it's not just anger, it's a deep and unwavering belief in the power of justice, even when that belief is tested to its limits. The audience will feel the growing tension, her struggle to stay focused under pressure, and ultimately the satisfaction of watching her triumph over adversity. The title itself signals a battle for justice in a system that often doesn't favor people like Amara. The phrase, "but the law is on her side," reveals that her victory is not just a personal achievement. It is a victory for truth, equality, and accountability. In this story, Amara Johnson's reputation, freedom, and professional career are at risk as she goes head-to-head with a corrupt judicial system. She risks everything to expose the truth, facing not only external obstacles, but also internal doubts and pressures. What she stands to gain, however, is a landmark legal victory that could set a precedent for future cases like hers. The courtroom was eerily silent, all eyes fixed on the judge. Amara's breath quickened as she stood at the podium, her palms clammy against the cold surface. The case was nearing its most critical moment. A decision had to be made. The judge, a seasoned and notoriously conservative man, had already made his bias clear in countless subtle ways. Amara had seen it. She'd felt it, like the weight of 1,000 eyes judging her every move. She had walked into that courtroom for the first time, and she was determined to make sure that her presence would not be forgotten. But now, as the final moments of the trial unfolded, she had to face the undeniable truth. The judge was doing everything in his power to stop her from winning. The defendant, a prominent real estate mogul with a long list of illegal dealings, was the very embodiment of power and influence in the city. His wealth, his connections, and his years of political maneuvering had given him immunity for far too long. Amara knew it. But what he didn't expect was the fire that burned within her, the fire that refused to let injustice go unchecked. Just as she was about to present her final piece of evidence, the judge cut her off with an icy glare. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice dripping with disdain, "this is not a circus. If you continue to waste my time with irrelevant arguments, I will have no choice but to dismiss this case." The words stung like a slap, but Amara didn't flinch. She had trained for this moment. The court might be against her. The judge might be against her. But the truth was on her side, and she was prepared to fight for it, no matter the cost. She took a slow breath, her heart pounding in her chest. With one hand gripping the edge of the podium, she lifted her chin, meeting the judge's gaze with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here to make sure that justice is served." The room felt even quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how the judge would respond. The old man's lips curled into a sneer. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone like her. She was young, Black, and a woman, a combination that had always seemed to trigger his deepest prejudices. But this time, things were different. This time, Amara was ready to face him head-on. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Amara could feel the energy shift in the room. The jury was watching her. The audience, made up of reporters, family members, and legal professionals, was on the edge of their seats. They all knew what was at stake. If she won, it would send shockwaves through the system. If she lost, it would be yet another case swept under the rug. The judge's gavel slammed down, breaking the tension in the air. "Proceed, Miss Johnson. But be warned, you're treading on dangerous ground," he warned, his eyes cold and sharp. Amara nodded, her hands no longer shaking. She wasn't afraid. She had nothing left to lose. All that mattered was the case, the law, and the people who had entrusted her with their lives. The screen behind her flickered to life, displaying a series of documents, evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over the past few weeks, evidence that could change everything. She knew the judge wouldn't like it. He would do everything in his power to dismiss it, to invalidate it, to make her disappear. But what he didn't know was that the law was on her side, and she wasn't going to let him silence her or her clients anymore. With a deep breath, Amara clicked the button. The first document appeared on the screen. A photograph. Her eyes didn't leave the judge as she spoke, her words clear and deliberate. "Your Honor, this is the proof of what you've tried to ignore. This man," she pointed to the defendant, "is guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and a series of other crimes that have been swept under the rug for years. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm demanding justice." Amara Johnson stood at the podium, her mind racing, but her outward appearance remained calm, precise, focused, determined. She wasn't new to pressure. Far from it. Raised in a world where every step had to be calculated, every decision scrutinized, Amara had learned to carry the weight of expectation long before she set foot in the courtroom. But what she had never anticipated was how hard it would be to face the legal system as a black woman. A legal system built on a history of oppression, designed to favor those who already held power. Amara had always been different. From the moment she could talk, she was asking questions no one else dared to ask. Why? Was a word that came naturally to her. She wasn't content with the surface answers that everyone else accepted. She wanted the truth, even when it was painful, even when it meant pushing against a system that would rather keep people like her in the dark. Growing up in a neighborhood that had seen more than its share of poverty, crime, and neglect, Amara had witnessed the devastating impact of inequality. Her father, a respected community activist, had taught her from an early age that silence was complicity. He instilled in her a deep sense of duty to speak out when others wouldn't, no matter the cost. Her mother, an attorney, showed her the power of the law to protect the vulnerable, to challenge the status quo, and to bring about justice, even when it felt impossible. But it wasn't always easy to balance the two worlds she inhabited. At school, she was often the only black face in the room. When she entered college, the challenge became even more apparent. There were times she had wondered if she was cut out for this, if the weight of history and expectation would crush her before she even had a chance to make a mark. But with each step, each barrier, Amara grew more resolute. At 28, Amara had already established herself as one of the most promising young attorneys in the city. Her legal acumen was undeniable, but it was her fierce sense of justice that made her stand out. Her colleagues respected her, though some of the older, more established lawyers whispered about her idealism, calling it a weakness. But they didn't understand. Amara wasn't trying to climb the same ladder they had. She wasn't interested in winning for the sake of winning. She was trying to build something. Change. Her office was a modest one, small but efficient. The walls were covered with bookshelves filled with case files, law reports, and an impressive collection of history books. There were framed photographs of her father, the late community leader, smiling at rallies, surrounded by people he had helped. She kept those pictures close because they reminded her of her purpose, her drive, and the legacy she was determined to continue. But there was more to Amara than just her fierce intelligence or her burning passion for justice. Her personal struggles, the doubts that crept in late at night when she was alone with her thoughts, often made her question if she was making the right choices. It had taken years for Amara to come to terms with the fact that her passion could sometimes come off as aggression to others, particularly those who didn't look like her. Her voice, when raised in the defense of her clients, was often mistaken for anger. She knew it wasn't, but her tone, her presence, was often met with resistance. It wasn't just the judge in the courtroom that she had to battle. It was the unspoken biases in the legal world, the way people saw her not for her skill, but for her skin color. There were days when she had wondered if the legal battles she fought were more about proving herself than actually changing anything. Amara's greatest fear wasn't failure. It wasn't even losing cases. Her biggest fear was losing her sense of purpose. She knew the world didn't always reward the right people, and it would be easy to get discouraged. It would be easy to walk away from the fight, to conform, to fall in line with the system. But Amara couldn't do that. She couldn't betray the people who had believed in her, the community, her father, her mother. When she first stepped into law school, she was terrified. She didn't know if she could keep up. She didn't know if she could fit in, let alone thrive. The pressure was overwhelming. But somehow she made it through. And with each victory, with each case won, she realized that this fight was hers. She wasn't just representing her clients. She was representing a history of injustice that had never been addressed, and she was determined to make it right. Her colleagues in law school had called her idealistic, a crusader, but Amara didn't mind. She wore their skepticism like armor, knowing deep down that one day they would see she wasn't just chasing ideals, she was chasing justice. And now, in this courtroom, facing a biased judge who was doing everything in his power to stop her, Amara realized that this moment was more than just another case. It was a turning point, a chance to prove that the law could be trusted, that justice could still be served, even when the system tried to undermine it. She glanced at the jury, their faces a mix of skepticism and hope, and then back at the judge. This was her moment. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as the judge, Judge Raymond Calloway, shifted in his seat, glancing down at the papers before him. His gavel was poised above the wood, as though he was already anticipating the disruption he was about to cause. Amara stood firm, her posture straight, but inside, she could feel the storm brewing. It wasn't the first time she had come up against a judge who didn't seem to understand or care for the laws meant to protect her clients. But today, something felt different. She had just laid out her argument for the case, a landmark case, no less, a class action lawsuit that could set a major precedent. Her clients were victims of predatory lending practices, targeted specifically because of their race, their socioeconomic status, and the systemic biases that ran deep in the banking industry. Amara had been fighting this case for over a year, meticulously gathering evidence, interviewing victims, and preparing for the most important moment of her career. But now, here she was, on the edge of her seat, watching as Judge Calloway glanced over her work with an air of dismissal. And then he did it. Without a word, Judge Calloway reached for the gavel and slammed it down with finality, a decision made before he even gave her a chance to respond. "The motion is denied," he declared, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "Your case is not proceeding. We are dismissing it." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The room went silent again, but this time, the weight of the moment settled around her like a thick fog. She opened her mouth to speak, but for a split second, no words came out. She had known this judge wasn't going to make it easy for her. His reputation as a conservative, pro-corporate judge was well known, and many had warned her that this case would be an uphill battle. But this was beyond anything she had expected. There were murmurs from the spectators in the gallery, whispers of disbelief. She could see her clients, the victims who had been waiting for this day for years, exchange nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Amara swallowed, forcing herself to focus. She had been through battles before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a judge dismissing a case. It was the entire system pushing back against her, against them. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses, a familiar sign of the pressure she was feeling. But this time, she knew she couldn't let it show. Not now. She glanced at the jury, mostly white, middle-aged men and women who had been quiet throughout the proceedings, their faces unreadable. She had seen that look before. Indifference. Amara's mind raced, running through the possibilities. She could appeal this decision, of course. But the clock was ticking. The judge had already made it clear he wasn't going to make it easy for her. The system was rigged, and he was the embodiment of it. He represented everything that stood in her way. But there was one thing the judge couldn't take away from her, the law itself. She took a deep breath, feeling her feet firmly planted on the ground. The law was on her side. It always had been. It didn't matter how many times she had to fight the system, how many judges tried to shut her down, or how many obstacles she faced. She was going to fight back. "I respectfully request a reconsideration, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. She was already formulating her next move, already calculating how she would challenge this ruling. This case is too important to be dismissed without a thorough examination of the evidence. Judge Calloway raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed with her defiance. Ms. Johnson, your arguments have been heard. You are wasting this court's time. The decision stands. For a moment, Amara's anger flared, but she squashed it down. The last thing she needed was to let her emotions take over. Instead, she turned toward the jury, her voice steady as she addressed them. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know this decision may seem final, but it is not. The evidence we've presented, the testimonies you've heard, they all point to one undeniable truth. These corporations took advantage of people who had no voice. She looked directly at the jury, making sure to meet each of their eyes. You have the power to make a difference. You are the ones who decide what is right and just. And I ask you, no, I implore you, not to let this ruling stand. Not for the people who've been wronged, but for the future of justice itself. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, but Amara felt a spark of hope. For a moment, she had their attention. But would it be enough? Before anyone could respond, Judge Calloway slammed his gavel again, his voice cutting through the tension. Enough. The decision is final. Court is adjourned. The gavel's echo felt like the final word on Amara's case, and for a moment, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It wasn't just the law that had failed her. It was the system, the very institutions that were supposed to uphold justice, and they had chosen to protect the powerful instead of the powerless. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Amara stood there, motionless for a moment. She couldn't accept this. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. There was only one thing left to do. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been punched in the gut. The gavel's final slam still echoed in her mind as she made her way out of the courtroom, her clients trailing behind her, a mix of confusion and disbelief on their faces. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was suffocating. The usual hum of city sounds, the cars zipping by, the distant chatter, it all felt miles away, muffled, as though Amara was suddenly in a world of her own. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, and now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her mind raced, each thought more tangled than the last. She knew the next steps. Appeal. Gather more evidence. Fight the system with everything she had. But deep inside, something gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. Could she win? Did she even stand a chance against someone like Judge Calloway, whose reputation for dismissing cases like hers was legendary? The ride was over before she could come up with any answers. Amara stepped out of the elevator and into the dimly lit parking garage, the flickering fluorescent lights above doing little to illuminate the weight of the moment. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her at first. Amara. A voice called out. She turned to see Clarence, one of her clients, a middle-aged man who had been caught in the mess of predatory lending. His voice was shaky, but his eyes were filled with determination. What happens now? Her stomach twisted. She wanted to tell him that everything would be fine, that they would keep fighting, but the truth was, she wasn't so sure anymore. The dismissal had been a blow. She had never faced a defeat like this, not on a case of this magnitude. I'm not giving up, Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll file an appeal. I'll keep pushing. We're not done yet. Clarence nodded, though his eyes remained clouded with doubt. I know you, Amara. I trust you. But this isn't just about us anymore, is it? It's about everything. His words hit her harder than she expected. This wasn't just her case. It wasn't just about one person or a group of victims. It was a battle for the future of justice. Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the moment of silence. She glanced down at the screen, expecting another email from her law firm about the case. Instead, it was a text from her colleague Eric. We need to talk. Call me when you get this. The unease settled deeper in her gut. What could he want? Had something changed with the appeal process? Or worse, was there more corruption waiting to greet her? I'll be back in a minute, she said to Clarence, though she had no idea how much time she would need. She stepped away from him and dialed Eric's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Amara. Eric's voice was tense low. We've got a problem. It's bigger than what you think. The judge didn't just dismiss the case because he didn't believe in it. There's more at play here. Her breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? The bank, the one at the center of the case. They have connections. Serious connections. I'm talking about people who are high up in politics, law enforcement, even the state legislature. They've been pulling strings from the start. This judge? He's just one piece of the puzzle. Amara's blood ran cold. She had known there were forces behind the scenes, but hearing Eric say it out loud made it all feel too real. She gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady her breath. So, it's not just a biased judge? It's a conspiracy? Her voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of it all beginning to crush her. Exactly, Eric replied. But that's not the worst part. I think they know about us, about you, and they've already started covering their tracks. We've got to be careful, Amara. You might be in danger. The words echoed in her mind as she stood there, the dim lights of the parking garage seeming to flicker more ominously. Danger? She had been warned about corrupt judges, but this was different. This was beyond what she had prepared for. I can't just back down, she said, her voice firm with resolve. We'll keep fighting. But if they think they can intimidate me, they're wrong. Eric was quiet for a moment. I get it. But just be careful. We need to move strategically from here. This isn't just about a lawsuit anymore. Amara disconnected the call, her fingers trembling as she put the phone back in her pocket. The sense of being watched, of being up against something far larger than herself, was overwhelming. She looked back at Clarence, who was waiting by the door of her car. I need you to trust me, she said, walking toward him, her voice quiet but resolute. This fight just got bigger, but I'm not backing down. We're going to expose everything. All of it. Clarence met her gaze, his face filled with determination. We're with you, Amara. All the way. Amara gave him a small nod, the weight of the responsibility settling more heavily on her shoulders. But it wasn't just her battle anymore. It was theirs, too. As she got into her car, a sense of urgency swept over her. She had to act quickly. The appeal, yes, but there was more to do. She needed to uncover the full scope of what was going on behind the scenes. And to do that, she would have to take risks. Dangerous ones. But she had never been one to shy away from danger. Not now. The journey had only just begun. And this time, Amara knew there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, legal filings, and frantic phone calls. Amara barely slept, her mind consumed by the case and the escalating threats surrounding her. She had never imagined that fighting for justice would mean battling against such a deeply entrenched system. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Her office was cluttered with case files, notes, and books. The hum of her computer and the ticking of the clock on the wall were the only sounds filling the otherwise silent room. She was hunched over her desk, reading through the newest round of legal documents, when her phone rang. It was Eric again, his voice more frantic than usual. Amara, we have a huge problem, he said, his words clipped. I just found something. Something that changes everything. Her stomach dropped. The weight of his tone made her heart race. What is it? She asked, her voice low with dread. I've been digging into Judge Calloway's background, his past cases, connections, the people he associates with. And I found something I didn't expect. A name. It's a name I never thought I'd see. Amara leaned forward, the tension in her shoulders mounting. What name? There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Eric was unsure of whether to say it aloud. Amara, it's your mother. The world seemed to stop. Amara felt the blood drain from her face, and for a moment, everything in the room blurred. Her mind raced back to her childhood, her mother, a lawyer. Herself, a woman who had been so consumed by her work that she had left Amara feeling neglected, abandoned even. But she had never imagined that her mother's past might somehow intersect with her present. What are you talking about? Amara's voice was barely above a whisper, the shock sinking deep. My mother? She hasn't been a part of my life for years. Eric's voice lowered to a murmur. That's not the point, Amara. I found out that Judge Calloway worked on a high-profile case over a decade ago. The defendant was a man connected to your mother, someone from her past, someone tied to criminal activity. It's no coincidence. There's something bigger going on here, and your mother might be involved. The floor seemed to drop out from under her as she struggled to process what Eric was saying. Her mother, a woman she had spent years resenting for abandoning her, had been involved with the very people who had just tried to derail Amara's case. She couldn't fathom it. Why didn't she ever tell me? Amara's voice trembled, her anger and confusion mounting with every word. Why would she keep this from me? Eric's response was quiet but urgent. We need to find out everything we can about this connection. Amara, this could be the key to everything. Your mother, Judge Calloway, They might be part of something much bigger, something that could destroy everything you've worked for. You have to find the truth. Amara felt the weight of the discovery press against her chest. Her mind was a storm of questions, doubt, and anger. She had trusted the system, trusted her own ability to fight it, and now it felt like the very foundation of her world was crumbling beneath her. "I need to see her," Amara said, her voice firm despite the chaos inside. "I need to know what she knows." Eric hesitated before speaking again. "Be careful. You don't know what you're walking into. It's not just the judge you're dealing with. There's more at stake here than you realize." Amara stood up from her desk, pacing the small confines of her office as she thought through her options. She had no choice but to confront her mother, to demand answers. But the thought of facing the woman who had abandoned her all those years ago filled her with a mixture of dread and rage. She had so many questions. She had so much anger, but was she prepared to face her mother again? To open a door that had been shut tight for so long? There was a knock at the door, pulling her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Clarence, her client, standing in the doorway with a hesitant expression on his face. He looked concerned, his brow furrowed as he met her eyes. "I didn't mean to interrupt, Amara," he said softly, stepping inside. "But I have to ask, are you okay? You've been pushing yourself too hard. I see the toll it's taking." Amara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm fine, Clarence. Just processing a lot. But thank you for asking." He stepped further into the room, his voice quieter now. "You know you don't have to do this alone, right? We're all in this with you. Whatever you need, we're here." The sincerity in his eyes hit her harder than she expected. Here was a man who had once felt helpless, a man who had turned to her for help. And now he was standing here, offering her his support. For the first time in days, she felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to carry this burden on her own. "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face what's coming. What if it's more than I can handle?" Clarence placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to know everything right now, Amara. Just take it one step at a time. We're with you." Amara nodded, grateful for his support, but her mind was still consumed by the twist Eric had revealed. The discovery about her mother, the judge, the conspiracy, it was all too much. She had been playing a game with stakes higher than she had ever realized. With a heavy heart, she knew what she had to do next. She would confront her mother. She would uncover the truth. But as she left her office to prepare for the confrontation, she couldn't shake the sense that something even bigger was waiting for her. Something she wasn't ready for. The stage was set. The pieces were moving into place. And Amara had no choice but to follow them, wherever they led. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in front of her mother's apartment door, her hand poised to knock. The building was old, the hallway dimly lit, and the silence around her felt suffocating. She hadn't seen her mother in over a decade, and now here she was, about to confront her about a dark secret that could destroy everything she had worked for. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the doorknob. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say to her mother, questions, accusations, pleas for answers, but nothing seemed to fit the gravity of the moment. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with the weight of the case pressing down on her. Never with the knowledge that her mother might be part of the very conspiracy she was trying to dismantle. The door opened, and there she stood, a woman who looked older than Amara remembered, her hair graying at the temples, her eyes tired and guarded. Her mother's face softened when she saw Amara, but only for a split second. It was quickly replaced by a cool, almost defensive expression. "Amara," her mother said, her voice neutral but carrying a hint of surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here. It's been a long time." Amara stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, taking in the woman who had once been her whole world, but who had abandoned her when she needed her most. Every emotion she had buried for years now surged to the surface. Anger, betrayal, hurt. But there was something else, something she wasn't ready to face, the hope that maybe, just maybe, this meeting could offer some answers. "I need to talk to you," Amara said, her voice strained but firm. "About the case. About the judge. About everything." Her mother's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about." Amara stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. "You do. I know about the connection between you and Judge Calloway. You were involved in his past cases. You were involved in something that's bigger than either of us. I need you to tell me the truth. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her mother's face went pale, and for a brief moment, Amara saw something flicker in her eyes: fear. It was enough to confirm what Amara had feared all along. Her mother knew more than she was letting on. "You have no idea what you're asking, Amara," her mother said softly, her voice suddenly shaky. "You don't know what you're getting into." "I need to know, Mom," Amara pressed, her fists clenched by her sides. "You owe me that. You owe me the truth." Her mother looked down, and for a moment, Amara could see the walls coming up, years of guilt, regret, and shame rising to the surface. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that simple," she said, her words laden with hesitation. "There are things you don't understand. Things I never wanted you to know. The truth is, I didn't want to drag you into all of this. You were just a child, Amara. You didn't deserve any of it." Amara's mind raced as she processed her mother's words. This wasn't the answer she had hoped for. It wasn't the closure she had been seeking all these years. But there was something in her mother's tone, something that made Amara realize that there was more to this than a simple betrayal. "So you kept me in the dark, just to protect me?" Amara's voice cracked, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "By keeping secrets from me? By leaving me behind?" Her mother's face softened, and she stepped closer to Amara. "I didn't leave you behind, Amara. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. But this is bigger than either of us. I didn't want you to get caught up in it. I didn't want you to end up like me." Amara felt her chest tighten. "End up like you? Like some criminal?" Her mother flinched, but then her eyes hardened, and her voice became more urgent. "You think it's just about the law? It's not. It's about power. It's about control. I made choices back then, and I regret them every single day. But this case you're involved in, this judge, the people he's connected to, they're not who you think they are. They'll destroy you, Amara. They'll stop at nothing." Amara's mind reeled. Her mother wasn't just trying to protect her. She was trying to warn her. But warn her of what? "I don't understand," Amara said, her voice shaking. "What are you saying? Who are they?" Her mother looked away, unable to meet her daughter's eyes. "I can't tell you everything. I can't risk it. But I can tell you this. Whatever you're up against, it's not just a legal battle. It's a fight for your life. And if you continue with this case, you won't just be up against the judge. You'll be up against forces you can't imagine." Amara's mind was spinning, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't back down now. She had come too far. The stakes were too high. "I've already made my decision, Mom," Amara said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm going to see this through, no matter what it costs me." Her mother's eyes widened in fear, and she grabbed Amara's arm, pulling her closer. "You don't understand. You think you're fighting for justice, but it's a trap. They'll destroy everything you've worked for. And when it's over, you'll be left with nothing." Amara shook her head, her voice resolute. "I can't stop now. I have to fight for what's right. For Clarence. For everyone who's been hurt by this corrupt system." For a moment, her mother just stared at her, as if trying to read her daughter's resolve. Then, with a resigned sigh, she stepped back, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Then you're on your own, Amara," she whispered. "I can't help you anymore." Amara's heart sank. This was it. Her mother had made her choice, and Amara had made hers. There was no turning back now. She turned away from the door, her mind clouded with uncertainty. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: the fight was far from over. And whatever happened next, she would face it alone. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Amara stood at the center of the floor, her eyes locked onto Judge Calloway. The moment had arrived, the moment that could change everything. Clarence's fate, the validity of the case, and even her own future all hinged on the verdict she was about to present. There was no room for error now. Her pulse thudded in her ears, and every breath felt shallow. The weight of the courtroom's gaze pressed on her, but it was the judge's piercing stare that haunted her. He had been so confident, so smug throughout the trial, convinced that no one could touch him. But now, in this final hour, he wasn't so sure. Amara glanced at her team, all of them locked in a shared silence, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They had worked tirelessly for this moment, and now, it was her turn to deliver the final blow. It was all on her. "Your Honor," Amara began, her voice steady but carrying an edge of authority that reverberated through the room. You may have thought this case was just another case, another victory for the system. But this trial was never about winning or losing. It was about justice. Her words sliced through the tension like a knife, and she saw the faintest flicker of discomfort in Judge Calloway's expression. He was used to the power he held over these proceedings, but Amara's unwavering confidence was starting to crack that foundation. Over the course of this trial, we have revealed a pattern, she continued, her eyes never leaving the judge. A pattern of corruption, of manipulation, of the system being twisted to favor the powerful while leaving the vulnerable to rot. She paused, taking a deep breath. The entire courtroom was on edge now, hanging on her every word. Amara's mind raced, the memories flooding back. The years of watching people like her family, her community, be crushed under the weight of a broken system. The countless injustices that had gone unnoticed, swept under the rug by people like Judge Calloway. She was about to expose him, not just as a judge, but as a criminal, a conspirator, a man who had spent his life taking advantage of the law rather than upholding it. I've spent months gathering evidence, Amara said, her voice low but powerful. Evidence that implicates not only this court, but the very people who have made a mockery of the system. People who have used their power to exploit the law for their own gain. And I have the proof right here. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, papers that had been meticulously prepared, containing damning evidence that would shake the very foundation of this court. As she laid them out on the table in front of her, she could feel the room grow quieter, the anticipation thick in the air. She turned her gaze back to Judge Calloway, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his steely exterior. "You see, Your Honor," Amara said, her voice dripping with controlled fury. "The law doesn't belong to the corrupt. It belongs to the people. And you, Judge Calloway, have betrayed that trust. You've betrayed your position of power. You've used your influence to manipulate the verdicts in your favor, to cover up crimes, to destroy lives." Judge Calloway stood suddenly, his face twisted in fury. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat, his voice rising with each word. "This is preposterous. You have no evidence, no proof." But Amara was undeterred. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it. She had expected his denial, his outbursts. And she was ready. "Is that so, Your Honor?" Amara said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Because, according to these documents, it seems that you've been taking bribes from multiple defense attorneys in exchange for favorable rulings. It seems you've been shielding criminals, guilty men and women, from justice. And now, it's time for you to answer for your actions." The courtroom gasped as Amara slid the documents across the table, letting the weight of the accusation sink in. The judge's face paled, his hands trembling as he reached for the papers. The damning proof was undeniable. He glanced around the courtroom, his eyes wild with panic, before locking eyes with Amara again. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "This is just the beginning. You've made a grave mistake, Miss Sinclair. You have no idea what you're up against." Amara took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "I know exactly what I'm up against, and I'm not backing down." In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The world outside the courtroom disappeared. It was just her and Judge Calloway, the two of them locked in a battle that would determine the course of the future. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, louder now than any voice in the room. But she was undaunted. The pieces were falling into place. She had fought her entire life for this moment, for this victory, and she would not let him take it from her. The judge took a shaky step back, his eyes darting between the courtroom and the evidence in front of him. He knew he had been caught. There was no escape. The walls were closing in. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A group of police officers entered, their uniforms sharp, their expressions grim. They were there to arrest him, to take him down for the crimes he had committed. Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her as they moved toward Judge Calloway. But as the officers moved in to make the arrest, he made a move that no one saw coming. He turned to face Amara, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place, something like fear, something like rage. "I'll make sure you regret this," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible, but the venom in it was unmistakable. But Amara stood her ground. She had taken down a giant. She had beaten him in his own court. The officers handcuffed Judge Calloway and led him out of the courtroom, the weight of his downfall hanging heavy in the air. For the first time in years, Amara felt like she had won. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this was the turning point. This was the moment that everything had changed. As the judge was escorted away, Amara turned to Clarence, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. He gave her a small smile, a silent thanks, but there was a depth of gratitude in his gaze that spoke volumes. Amara knew this wasn't just about winning a case. It wasn't just about justice for Clarence, or even for her. This was about something much bigger, the beginning of a movement, a chance to dismantle the corruption that had plagued the system for far too long. And it was only just beginning. The days that followed the trial were a whirlwind of media attention, public outcry, and a growing sense of justice taking root. Amara had always been a quiet force, working behind the scenes to right the wrongs in the system, but now, she was a name that echoed across headlines. People admired her courage, her determination, and most of all, the way she stood unwavering in the face of corruption. It was a bittersweet victory. In the days after Judge Calloway's arrest, Amara found herself reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. Her childhood had been marked by the silent battles her family fought against a system that had never been designed to favor them. She thought of her mother, who had spent years fighting for a fair trial that never came, of her father who had been wrongly convicted and imprisoned, and of every small injustice that had accumulated over the years. This wasn't just about Clarence anymore. This wasn't just about one case. This was about a future where people like her, people from communities like hers, wouldn't have to fight for their rights anymore. It was about dismantling the systems that kept the truth buried beneath layers of lies and power. The courtroom had been just the beginning. The press conferences that followed her victory were overwhelming. Reporters, cameras flashing, their questions tumbling out in a rush. Amara answered with grace and poise, but each question only reminded her of the weight of what she had just done. Yet, there was a strange sense of peace in knowing that she had taken down the very person who had once seemed untouchable. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The public's response was mixed. Some hailed her as a hero. Others were unsettled by the scandal that had rocked the judicial system. There were whispers, murmurs of a deeper conspiracy, of more judges and politicians involved in the web of corruption. But Amara didn't let it faze her. She was prepared for the backlash, prepared for the resistance that would inevitably come. At night, when the crowds dispersed and the press stopped calling, Amara would find herself alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the city skyline. The world outside felt distant now, as if she were a part of something much larger than herself. The victory was sweet, but it was also heavy. Her thoughts turned back to Clarence. He had been released, the charges against him dropped, and the case had been thrown out. It was a victory for him, a victory for his family. But Amara knew the road ahead would not be easy for him. People like Clarence never truly walked away from their past, no matter how hard they tried. The system didn't forgive. It never did. Still, seeing his face light up with the possibility of a future he had once believed was out of reach gave Amara a sense of fulfillment she couldn't put into words. She had helped him, yes. But more than that, she had restored a sense of hope, not only for him, but for everyone who had been denied justice for far too long. One evening, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, Amara received a call from the mayor's office. They wanted to meet with her. Amara, the mayor's voice crackled through the phone. We've been watching your work, and we believe it's time to take this fight further. We need someone like you in office, someone who can push real change. Will you consider running for district attorney? The question hit her like a wave, washing over her with an intensity she hadn't expected. Running for office was never something she had imagined. But then, nothing about her journey had been expected. She sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the offer. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. The law had always been her passion, but now, the fight was bigger than just practicing it. She could be part of the system, within it, working from the inside to change it. Or she could remain on the outside, continuing the fight in the way she had always done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Amara spoke. I've already made my decision, she said, her voice firm, though her heart raced with anticipation. I've been fighting this battle for too long, and it's time for a real change. Yes, I'll run. The words felt surreal as they left her lips, but in that moment, she knew it was the right choice. The The fight had never been just about one case. It had always been about the future. A future where people like her could rise, where justice wasn't a dream but a reality. She hung up the phone, the weight of the decision settling in. She had a long road ahead of her, campaigning, winning support, taking on the very system she had fought against. But as she sat there, in the stillness of her apartment, a small, confident smile crept across her face. She wasn't just going to change the law. She was going to change the world. The very next morning, the media erupted with the announcement. Amara Sinclair, the lawyer who brought down Judge Calloway, is running for district attorney. The headlines screamed her name, but Amara knew the battle was far from over. There would be more enemies, more obstacles, more moments where it seemed like the world was against her. But that was fine. She had never been afraid of a fight. As the days passed and the campaign began, Amara's resolve only grew stronger. She met with supporters, spoke at town halls, and listened to the stories of people who, like her, had felt powerless for far too long. Each story fueled her passion, reminded her of why she had started this fight in the first place. Her message was clear. Change was coming, and it would come through people who believed in justice, who believed in a system where everyone, regardless of race or background, could stand in the light of truth. And slowly, with every step she took, with every speech she gave, the idea of justice began to feel less like a dream and more like an inevitable reality. Amara Sinclair was just getting started. The real work had only begun.